All right, I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, and you looked at me kind of sideways, honestly. And I think that this is a very apt comparison. Today's tough question: have the Vols discovered how to use Joe Milton? Today's tough question brought to you by Andy Mason Real Estate. Caleb, the comparison to Cam Newton has been out there, but it was never more applicable than that 81-yard touchdown run on the first play of the UTSA game. And it looked very Newton-esque. Now, that's a lot to aspire to. That's Cam Newton was probably the greatest one-year wonder in the history of college football. But
Until Joe Burrow.
Joe Burrow. They both accomplished basically the same thing. So it's one of the two. But that offense was better, you're right, at LSU than Auburn's overall. But do you think that Tennessee has discovered how to use Joe Milton? Because I think it was a little simplistic to come out and say, oh, you've got another guy who can throw the ball and run a little bit. He's just Hendon Hooker too. No, he's not Hendon Hooker too. He's different on and off the field, and he's a different type of player with different strengths and weaknesses. So your thoughts on the Cam Newton comparisons, and is this a good sign for Tennessee that they seem, and I noticed this in the game, if you remember me mentioning on the post game, I noticed this in the game. It seems like they are playing with some things that are different from what they did last year, including the screen pass, which I know drives some people crazy. You had the shovel pass. You had some other things. You had him with the option. I think they're learning how to use him. I think this is a good direction for Tennessee football.
I think they knew how to use him. I think Joe Milton didn't know how to use himself, and that's
How
where I've
so?
been after the whole. Well, we saw a lot of this in the Florida game, where Milton, yes, the pass protection was bad, but part of having the idea of having a 6'5", 240-pound quarterback who can run. By the way, he clocked in, I think, 21.3 miles an hour at full acceleration going to the end zone the other day, which is really, really fast. As I think a big part of that is they need to be able to offset a bad line or a struggling line by knowing where to step in the pocket and knowing when to run. Milton has been refusing to take off until that run last week. And that was a designed run. And so I think that Joe Milton has just been refusing to take advantage of his legs. And this was a big difference between Hendon Hooker and him. Hooker was not afraid to use his legs. Now, I get it. You don't want to go nefarious, but you have to question, is Joe Milton just trying to make sure he saves himself health-wise for the NFL draft? And that's why he's not using his legs.
I don't think it's that at all, Caleb. What I think it is every quarterback in the past 20 years that I've covered that can run wants to point out that they can beat you from the pocket, because used to be being able to run the football was a sign that you weren't a complete pocket passer. That, he's a runner too. And I can tell you, going back in the day, and that people used to call newspapers before they had pictures, and they would stereotype and say, is the guy black or white? And the implication was, if he's black, he runs. If he's white, he's a pocket passer. We now know that is stupid, that there are runners that are white. There are throwers that are black. There was Warren Moon back then who was a pocket passer and couldn't run. So I believe that he's fighting the stereotype of a running quarterback is not a pocket passer, and he wants to be the best pocket passer. I don't think it's self-motivated or self-centered. I think it's just that he wants to be the best quarterback he can be, and he believes that Tennessee will beat more people from the pocket than they will with him running the football. Or it could just be as simple as making bad reads on the option play at times.
I mean, that's very possible too. Look, either way, the truth of the matter then is Milton doesn't know what he is. Sorry, Joe. I don't know if you want the stereotype or not, but you've got it. Joe has to be able to run the ball. And
that's the thing. That's a completely dated concept, because every best quarterback in the NFL now can do what?
They can run for the most part. There's a couple of exceptions, but yeah.
A couple. But even like the guy at Buffalo or Justin Herbert, they can all run. They may look like stereotypical stand in the pocket passers when you just look at them standing, but they can all run. Josh Allen is who I was referring to. It's almost to the point where if you can't run, and somebody needs to tell Joe Milton this, if you can't run, then you might not find a home in the NFL. And that's bizarro talk just 10 years ago.
That's true. No, that's a very good point. I still think, though, look, I think Milton has to rely on his legs more than other quarterbacks. Other quarterbacks have to be mobile and be able to run to a certain degree, but they can beat you from the pocket. Look, I'm just going to be honest. Milton can't beat you from the pocket. He can't, and he's never going to be that quarterback. He has to rely more on the run, similar to Anthony Richardson to a certain degree. And, I mean, that doesn't mean there's not a spot for you in the NFL. And
that doesn't mean that's a knock. I mean,
exactly.
even kind of you're saying it like, am I knocking him? You're not. I mean, he can run. That's incredible. Great. Run, Joe, run.
This is the Cam Newton. And by the way, we're comparing him to Cam Newton. Cam Newton, if he had to just beat you from the pocket, would not have lasted 2 years in the NFL. I mean, the reason Cam Newton was so good was because he was such a threat running the ball. By the way, Cam Newton embraced it. Now, yes, you have a shorter NFL career when you do that. I mean, because you're going to take a lot of hits. And if you can't purely throw from the pocket, you're not going to last as long. But heck, it's still a 10-year NFL career. And so for instance, Hendon Hooker. Yes, Hendon Hooker can run, but I think, Dave, you and I both agree. If Hendon Hooker lost his mobility tomorrow, he could still probably turn into a pretty good NFL quarterback because
That's a great point. And if Joe couldn't, then he's not going to be an NFL quarterback. I would agree with that.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, that's not a knock on Joe Milton. It's who he is. I mean, if Caleb didn't know UT history, then he wouldn't be nearly as good as what he is. If Caleb didn't know football or I didn't know football, this show wouldn't be nearly as good as what it is, which is award-winning.
If Michael Jordan didn't run a 4.3 40 and wasn't as athletic, he wouldn't be as great of a basketball player.
Yeah. Joe Milton, I think, needs to accept that. And that's interesting you bring up maybe he's not using himself right, which kind of sounds a little bit funny. It's brought to you by Andy Mason Real Estate, andymasonrealestate.com. Best service, best prices in the biz, and it's not even close. andymasonrealestate.com. He's my realtor. He should be yours. Absolutely love Andy Mason and andymasonrealestate.com. Now, on the message board, said he's an average quarterback. He's not Cam Newton. I think you and I would agree, Caleb, that he's not Cam Newton. I mean, Cam Newton was a pretty special individual, but the comparisons, though, are still applicable.
The only real difference, and this is a big one, if I'm being honest, because they have similar sizes and could be similar. Cam Newton's was a little more fluid of a runner. Cam Newton, he wasn't as accurate. I mean, he wasn't accurate at all, really, but he, just like Joe Milton, but Cam Newton at least had good touch on his throws.
That's exactly what I was going to say. You read my mind.
Really? He had great touch on his throws, whereas Joe Milton still doesn't have that. But if Joe Milton got the touch on his throws, and I don't know if you can develop that or not, there wouldn't be much difference, guys. I mean, that's crazy to say, but there wouldn't.
No, it is the touch on the ball. Now, if you go back and look, Cam threw it with his fingers, and it left his fingers with touch, which is exactly what you're saying. And Milton throws a very heavy ball, which has led to the conversation of receivers dropping it, or is it more along the lines of him being off target? That is very debatable.